No, but if it's over there and we have the
Yeah, I
headphones
have
on,
both
that's probably
on,
why
yeah.
I wouldn't hear it.
Yeah, both of them are on.
All right. All right. Welcome back to the show. Today I am very honored to have Rich Diviney on my show. I first saw Rich about a year and a half, no, it was about almost exactly a year ago. I went to an Arate conference and he was speaking. And I have to say, I was so blown away by you and what you had to say and about your book. And I was fortunate enough to join Emily Frisella and Gabriella Lyons book club after that and really go through your book. And then I decided, due to my structure of my executive, we every quarter we read a book, and I thought this is the perfect book for my guys. And we've been doing this probably 5 years. So, 5 years, 4 quarters. That's a lot of books. At
Yeah.
least 20 books.
Yeah.
Well, minus Jordan Peterson. That one took 2 quarters.
That's a long one.
That was a long one. There was no getting through that in 1 quarter. But I have to say, out of all the books, your book was in the top at probably one or two of the favorites of my entire group.
Oh.
And that's why I knew I had to get you out here.
Yeah.
You just resonate with us as a group, and what you have to say is so pertinent, especially in our line of business.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you so much for coming out here. So
Well,
thank you.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored that you all, the book resonated with all of you. It's it's so wonderful to write a book, and when you're writing it, you're kind of in this dark office cave, just pounding away at stuff, and you never. It's in the back of your mind that some people might read it, but when it comes out and people do and they like it, it's a real gift. So.
Absolutely. Well, we talk about, I don't know if you talk about, but, some of the silver linings of the pandemic, I think that forced a lot of us into having that space to be able to do something like that.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that helped you sort of just, I can't do anything else, so I might as well put all my attention on this?
I do, but I also think that we are the type of people who find opportunity wherever we can. So there are some people who didn't do well during the pandemic, and I think it's because they didn't have the right perspective, and they didn't ask themselves. Well, let me baseline. It's also because some of them were sick, right? So that there were some people that really struggled with sickness, but those who didn't really get sick, there's some who may not have just seen or asked themselves the right questions about what could I be doing during this time? What new things? What discoveries? What are the positives of this situation? So approaching it that way, and for me, I mean, being home with my wife and kids, not too bad for me. I mean, especially having been deployed so often.
After all those years.
Yeah. So yeah, really just squeezing out those positive opportunities.
Awesome. Well, and I'll say that's why I started this podcast. I was just feeling like, running healthcare in California during a pandemic, it was very challenging.
Yeah.
And how can I reach more people? How can I help? And that's why I started this podcast, because it kind of, for me, it was very cathartic, but also, any other ways that I could help people that could not come in, that were stuck at home, that were sick. That
Yeah.
was the most important thing to me. So there was definitely some silver linings there.
Absolutely, and I think it's our job to find those silver linings. Sometimes it's difficult to see those silver linings in the moment, right? So if we don't see those in the moment, then we have to, I think, take some time to autopsy those moments after the fact. And I think that's really where the true resilience and anti-fragility come in, is the ability to really reflect positively and optimally.
I 100% agree. And again, this is why your book resonated. In one part of your book, one of the attributes, and we'll discuss my possible disagreement with this,
Okay.
but on task switching.
Yeah.
You talked about, like, for you during the pandemic, it's just exhausting when you're not doing what's normal.
Mm-hmm.
You have to reprogram sort of your brain, and with that comes exhaustion. And I remember so much in the pandemic, especially at the beginning, having to make decisions every day. Do we have people come in? Do we isolate? Do we quarantine? Do we do, there was just like so many questions that had never been asked before. There was nobody to look to answer them.
Yeah.
And I was just exhausted
Yeah.
from all the new decision making that had to be done. And you perfectly talk about that in that attribute in the book.
Yeah, it's our brains are fascinating things, and they make up so much of what we experience in life, and they're also, many people don't know, they're very energetically draining in terms of the energy that the resources they take from our physiology to actually do what we need to do every day. I mean, our brains draw a lot of it, and part of that is just because of the way we're constantly interrogating the world. Our brains are always switched on, at least when we're conscious, and that's a big deal. We don't recognize those types of energy detriments or even withdrawals throughout a day or a week or a month. That's where a lot of stress and anxiety and fatigue and ultimately ill health comes from.
Yeah, 100%. And again, we saw so much of that during the pandemic because, again, unprecedented.
Yes.
People didn't know what to do. They
That's
didn't
right.
know what to believe. They didn't know what to think. And there was just so much illness. Besides, if you got COVID, just the side effects from living through that, it's just created, like, I think we're going to be dealing with for a very long time
Yes.
after this because of that.
Yeah, a lot of after effects, and you can't, again, those aren't immediately apparent in the moment, but I think we have to be cognizant of it. I mean, just our kids. I have two teenage boys, and one's 17 now, and one's 15. But they, were in my 17-year-old had to start his freshman year virtually, finish his 8th grade and start his freshman year, and the other boy the same way. And so, and then when they went back, we're in masks, and we know that so much social intelligence and activity comes from just facial expressions alone. I mean, it's only about, I think, 9% of what we actually say. Everything else is facial expressions and the way we say it. So when you don't have those cues, it's a whole different type of brain wiring that's going on.
And I agree. I luckily my kids were older, although my son, he was senior year high school when it happened, so he lost. And he loved high school.
Yeah.
Unlike me, he really was a full part of it, and I was a full part of it. I almost was as sad as he was, what he was losing. But, we were fortunate that he was at the end of that, and he decided to go to Baylor, so he was in a bit of a different situation than everybody else out here. But I see everybody with, like, smaller kids and what they're going through, and now the reacclimation, and, now they just want to keep the mask on because it makes them feel comfortable or normal, or it's a very tough process for them to let it go.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it has to do with us as parents, and the parents I've seen who were relaxed about the whole thing. Hey, wear a mask if you need to wear a mask. Don't when you need to. They weren't projecting their anxiety. The kids reflect that. But then you see people who are maybe on the more paranoid scale, and you'll see their kids wearing masks all the time, and vice versa. So none of this is right or wrong. I think it's more just yet another statement as to how we influence those around us, especially our young people and our kids, just by our behaviors alone, let alone what we say and what we do.
100%. So I'm going to switch gears slightly because I brought it up. So I am a self-proclaimed multitasker.
Okay.
I love it. I'm going to walk, I'm going to listen to my book, I'm going to do this other thing, and I'm going to do 5 things, and I feel very good about that, and I get those all done. And when you put that part in the book about what was the
I think 2% if I'm correct.
Yeah, that are actually super taskers. And you very clearly said, and you're not one of them. And I was like, I'm going to fight him on that one.
By the way, I wrote that hoping that some of the 2% would read that and disagree. So here we are.
Yes, that's me. And it's so funny. I almost didn't have my guys read this book because of that statement, because they all know I proclaim myself to be a multitasker. And they even said it during words like, we're surprised you had us read that, Angie, because you think you're a multitasker.
Yeah.
And so I love that. And it actually made me reflect because of the way you wrote it. Like, am I extreme on hyper-focused, or am I extreme in the other direction where I start a bunch of things but I can't necessarily finish them because of that? And the realization that I came to is the reason I think I'm a super tasker is because I'm actually right in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm not hyper-focused, but I'm also not doing too many things where I can't complete anything. And so maybe that's where I get my false sense of thinking that I can do everything.
Well, and I agree. And what we have to remember is even as a super tasker, you're still not necessarily multitasking. What you're doing is you're task switching very rapidly and efficiently. And that's really what's happening, because these super taskers, you being one of them, tend to be able to shift focus. Again, task switching is our brain shifting focus points from one thing to another. And a lot of people think they can do that very, very well, but if you connect, probes to their brain and start looking at where their brain fires, what you'll recognize is they'll degrade in their ability to actually perform tasks as they switch back and forth. Others actually do very well, and the super taskers actually improve. And so yes, there are a percentage of people who are actually very good at it, and some people's professions will indicate that. Like I would say, like party planners, for example, they are natural task switchers, and again, they're not. It feels like they're multitasking, but what they're able to do is just shift between focus points very rapidly and very efficiently, which I'm sure you can do.
I do. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm pretty good at
Yeah.
it. But I will say, even after hearing that, I started turning off all the outside noise and really focusing on one thing and spending my time. If I'm going to do a walk, I'm going to turn everything
Yeah.
off and just mindfully be there. And I feel like that's actually helped me be a better multitasker by giving myself a break when it needs to.
Yeah.
Giving myself that space to put my attention fully on something
Yeah.
or not on anything, which has been new for me.
Well, and it's one of those things that we forget, and I think you and I both, because we're the same age, we grew up in a time frame where there weren't a lot of things calling our attention, and now, of course, with the mobile phones, which are awesome, they have such great capability, but we're literally walking around with thousands of contexts and categories just in our pocket, and so these things are calling our attention and forcing our brains to task switch sometimes when we really don't need to, and so this is actually neurologically and physiologically exhausting. And I would say, even if you are, like yourself, a super tasker and can task switch efficiently and effectively, to cut out as many opportunities for switches that you haven't planned or anticipated or don't require is only going to make your process even better.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think, because of my business, it's a 24/7. I've been doing it for almost 28 years. We're used to always paying attention because if
Yeah.
there's an emergency, we got to respond. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like, oh, this can wait till tomorrow. But, and that's probably what's helped me become sort of a super tasker.
Well, and I'll just say this because one of the primary categories for that I'm asked this all the time. People say, hey, what do you think the Navy SEALs are the highest on out of all those categories? And without a doubt, it's the mental acuity attributes. It's the ability, because even grit starts in the brain, and so all those attributes start in the brain. But the ability to be situation aware, so you're taking in information, then from that information you're prioritizing. Okay, I'm going to focus on this, and as you're focusing, you're still maintaining a little bit of situation awareness, because if something out there jumps the priority list, becomes the priority, then you immediately switch to it. And that's what Navy SEALs do. That's probably what you do, and that actually is very conducive of effective task switching.
And that totally makes so much sense. And I think that's why your book resonated with all of us so much, because, in our top 3 books was David Goggins, Can't Hurt Me, as well as Jocko's Extreme Ownership. And they both had great things, but yours, it wasn't just like go hard and that's the solution. There was actually the statements and the facts and the science that backs up why we're not all that physical type, but although we all have a lot of those attributes, but it made a lot of sense to us why we're all, some of us been working together for almost 25 years, but why we stay doing what we're doing and why we love it and why we're actually really good at it.
Yeah. I know David. David and I actually served together. In fact, when I first met Huberman, he and I were at this event with a small group of us, and it was Huberman and I, and Goggins was one of the guys there, and he and David and I got to catch up. We hadn't realized that we had served together. I really love his method. I don't know, I never served with Jocko, so I don't know him, but I've read his book, and I think he has some fantastic leadership disciplines. One of the things that those guys are so powerful at doing in their literature and in their podcasts and such is telling people, like you said, hey, just go do it. Just do it, right? I mean, just knuckle down and get it done. And I think that's fantastic. What I've always been interested in is, okay, how do we do it? Because again, it's somewhat easy for me as former Navy SEAL to say, okay, I'm just going to do it. But I'm really interested, okay, why is it? Why can I do that, and how can I do that? And if I can figure that out, then that's not a SEAL thing, it's a human thing.
Right.
And so that's, I think, where I wanted to angle for this book was start to explain a little bit about those elemental things and some of those backgrounds and kind of the why, so people can say, okay, I know I need to just do it. How do I just do it? And part of the how is to understand where we start.
I love that. And that segues perfectly into the courage attribute, because I love what you said. It's not like you know, defeating the dragon. It's more like you just taking that first step forward.
Yeah.
And then that releases the different hormones that make you feel good.
Yeah.
And I think so many people, and again, referencing the pandemic, got analysis by paralysis. Paralysis by
Yes,
analysis.
I
They
get it,
couldn't
basically,
make
yeah.
decisions. They were like frozen. I should do this. I don't know what to do. And it created the fear.
Yes.
Whereas if we just kind of like what I was forced to do because of the greatest good of my group, keep moving forward and taking steps forward,
Yes.
it helped us get through it in a better way than a lot of people did.
Yeah, and I mean, courage is fascinating. And again, people have asked me, hey, what are the most important attributes to have? And I try to steer away from ranking them. However, instead of dodging the question, I actually thought about it. And really, when thinking about it, if we talk about humans holistically and optimal performance holistically, those grit attributes are probably the most important. In other words, if you don't, as a human being, have some courage, some adaptability, some perseverance, and some resilience, you're gonna have a hard time. You really are. And so I think courage, and out of all of those, I think courage is quite notably the first one. It's probably the most important one because that is literally taking the step. I mean, if courage is taking the step into your fear, into challenge and difficulty, perseverance is doing it over and over again. Adaptability is, as I'm doing it, I'm going to adapt, and then resilience is once it's done, I'm going to get back to baseline. So courage has to be the first thing, and I think it's fascinating to think about us as a species going from cave dwellers to space explorers, and the reason behind that is because nature set us up to get physiologically rewarded when we step into our fear, and we get that dopamine reward. It's a dopamine hit. Just like most addictive behaviors, and again, dopamine is not the actual it's not the actual feel-good chemical as much as it's a chemical that tells us something feels good, which is why when we do something that feels good, we get that dopamine that says, oh, we want to do that again, do that again, do that again. Stepping into our fear and clicking that courage switch gives us that dopamine, that hit, and it doesn't mean it has to be finished. It means every time we take a step, we get a hit, which is really both fascinating and encouraging to people to start just trying some stuff that they might be afraid of or uncomfortable or anxious about.
Yeah, and like you said, it doesn't mean you have to be the best at it, but you just have to take the
Oh
step
yeah,
at it.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it was funny when I was reading that. I'm doing 75 hard again, like we talked about, and I realized I become addicted to that dopamine. I'm like, oh, I got that done. I did that. I
Yes.
did that. I'm feeling so great.
Yeah.
And they're not like hard tasks, although some people look at them and go, working out twice a day, that's hard.
Yeah.
But it's as hard or not hard as you want it to be, but it's just that constant checking
Yeah.
off that box, taking that step forward. And so I almost become addicted to that
Yeah.
dopamine feeling, which is very similar to when I used to do drugs.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and I think that's again why this book resonates so much with our staff, because to be a good drug addict, you have to have all of those attributes of mental acuity and grit and courage and all that stuff, perseverance and getting
Yeah.
the job done in order to be a quote unquote good/bad drug addict.
Right. But also what's interesting is to think that neurologically, biologically, and physiologically, you're hitting those same wickets, right? So in other words, people who are still struggling have an out. They can still get those same rewards, but they have to shift. And I know it's that shift that's the hardest thing. But once you shift, just like you said, hey, I'm getting the same. I'm getting fulfillment. I'm getting and oh, by the way, it's making everything better instead of making everything worse, right? So
Yeah.
so there's added benefit of the outside world also rewarding you. But I think it's just fascinating, these behaviors that we engage in as human beings. They all stem from somewhere, and they all stem from how our nervous system responds, or how our nervous system takes it in, how that generates our physiology, our biochemistry, and our neurology in terms of our optic of it.
And I love that because again, it just plays so much into, you know, our modality of how we look at addiction
Mhm.
and even how we help individuals. So